We just need a few seconds to stream to Facebook and then we'll get started.
At the end.
Good? Action.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Bethel AME Church in Providence, Rhode Island. We are here today for an amazing and special moment, and we're just so glad that you all decided to tune in and join in with us. My name is Shondell Burning-Speaks. I am the Senior Advisor for Mayor Jorge Ellosa and the Executive Director of the African American Ambassadors Group. Excuse me. First off, I'm just going to bring to us, before I bring to us our first guest, I just want to acknowledge that it is Black History Month, and what we are having today is super significant for the time that we are in and the month that we are in. So thank you all, and let's welcome Mr. Keith Stokes, who is the Director of Business Development for the City of Providence. Keith.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Shondell. Thank you, Mayor Ellosa, the team, the soon-to-be, the commission members for taking this time. And as Shondell said, I can't think of a better time to have this announcement than the last day of Black History Month here in Rhode Island. My name is Keith. Research phase of a truth, reconciliation, and reparation process. And we were able to produce what we think is one of the most comprehensive assessments on the history of racialized discrimination in Providence and Rhode Island, called the Matter of Truth Report. And if you haven't had a copy of that report, we'll make sure you have a copy of it, either in a PDF or a physical version. It provides a very extensive history of racialized discrimination towards indigenous and African heritage people starting in 1620 and carrying forward to 2020. What's most important about that report is it has nearly 700 primary secondary sources of information for further research and understanding of this history. But the purpose of today is to begin to provide an introduction to the next phase of reconciliation and the final phase of reparative justice. And it's exciting to be at this particular location, this historic church. It's one of a number of historic Black churches, the early churches of Providence and Rhode Island, who were also displaced from their original locations, largely centered in what today is recognized as College Hill, but at the time would have been College Hill, or Lippitt Hill, or Mount Hope, or Fox Point. All traditional, historic African, indigenous, Cape Verdean families and communities that dated back to the 18th century. One of the great challenges we have in interpreting this history is understanding the fact that the history of racialized discrimination is something that was at the very beginning of the founding of Providence. In fact, the very founding of Providence, the founding of most communities across the Americas, were founded under two very basic principles: the taking and utilization of indigenous people's land, and the use of African heritage people to work that land. And that history would carry forward and evolve into racialized discrimination that still carries forward today. And those social economic scars of disparity still impact those people of color. And it's absolutely essential that we understand that the history that we've been able to unveil is an ongoing history that still continues to this day. And the goal in a reconciliation process is to bring us together to understand and to be able to agree upon a process towards reparative justice, so that all Providence residents, regardless of race, ethnicity, or religion, or sexual orientation, have the rights to have equal access to social and economic prosperity. That's true justice, that's true equity. And much of this focus will be closing what we call the racial equity gap that still exists. So it's an exciting day. We have much work ahead, and this work will be a public process, a community engagement process, and be led by an outstanding group of men and women who will be forming our commission. But this work begins with the process of understanding this history. And what we've done, just as an example, is to provide behind me two boards that represent hundreds of documents and images that we had provided as a part of the Matter of Truth Report. This board to my left, to your right, shows the former Lippitt Hill community. Lippitt Hill community would be today University Heights, and very much the shopping center that's bounded by Doyle Avenue and Olney Street and Lippitt Street and down to North Main Street. But before that, it was the Lippitt Hill community. The Lippitt Hill community had one of the largest, most concentrated African heritage, indigenous Cape Verdean communities. But during the 1950s into the 1960s, the city of Providence, like many urban cities across America, embarked upon an urban renewal program to what they believed was removing blight, but what they actually did was remove families from the historic communities. Communities, in many cases, where properties were owned, businesses were owned and operated, dating back not decades, but centuries. And in this image here, you see Lippitt Hill today with the University Heights in 2021, but at the end of 1962, when urban redevelopment policies of the city of Providence were completed, the entire neighborhood was demolished. Hundreds of families of color were permanently dislodged and dispersed from their own communities and homes. And this was playing out in Lippitt Hill and Providence, Fox Point, South Providence, Washington Park, Olneyville, Elmwood. In fact, at one point, the African American community of the United States called urban renewal Negro removal, because the feeling was that we were being taken from our ancestral homes, our places of work and worship, for public policies that ultimately did not benefit us. And what's interesting about that is that many of these urban renewal communities of the 50s and 60s are today some of the most highly valued neighborhoods within the communities that they reside, but very few people of color live in those communities. And then to my right is a 1935 map as a part of the City of Providence archives. And it's a map that's developed by financial institutions, realtors, other stakeholders who are looking to invest in where to invest at the time, federally insured guaranteed mortgages. An outcome of the Great Society programs of Franklin Delano Roosevelt was developing what would become the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, mortgage programs, insurance programs, and the way of fast-tracking people out of the Depression from lower income to middle income was to give them opportunity to own a home. Because we know then, we know today, owning a house is the fastest way to build equity and economic stability and prosperity. Tens and tens of thousands of families across New England took advantage of those federally insured mortgages and loans. But if you happen to live in a neighborhood where a red line was circled around it, that neighborhood was deemed as economically unstable. It was a neighborhood that was deemed as a community that would not and should not receive federally insured guaranteed mortgages and insurance. And in the case of Providence, those red line communities are Lippitt Hill, parts of College Hill, Fox Point, Elmwood. Again, the same historic communities that have faced racialized discrimination from race riots in the 19th century to urban redevelopment and renewal in the mid-20th century, and now ongoing restricted access to basic services that was uplifting most Americans coming out of the Depression and then past World War II into the 20th century. So these are two of just several graphics that provide a documented and detailed history of how people, fellow Providence residents, who lived and worked and worshiped side by side with many of your own families, did not receive the basic rights simply because of the color of their skin. And this was going on and beginning in the enslavement, in indigenous people land taking of the 17th and 18th century, and it carried forward into the 20th century into the present day. So the purpose of us being here today is to create a reparative justice investment strategy so that all Providence residents have equal access to success and prosperity in this great city. So it now gives me great pleasure to introduce the leader of this effort, the visionary of this effort, the man who really helped push all of us forward in bringing this process, in developing these reports, and creating these strategies for the people of Providence. It gives me great pleasure and honor to introduce our mayor, Jorge Ellosa.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Keith. Keith has been a thought partner in this work from the very, very beginning, as it was a seed just beginning to germinate. And he's been a leader as a member of the community, as part of the research team, and as a member of my team in City Hall in getting this going. So we owe you a huge debt of gratitude, Keith. Thank you for all the work and the thought leadership that you provided throughout this project. So today we're announcing two separate things. We're announcing the framework for reconciliation that has been developed by Ray and the team at Roger Williams in conjunction with members of the community. And we're also here to sign an executive order creating a reparations committee. So we'll take those two in order, but they are steps along the same process. In fact, they work together very seamlessly. So those are the two things, and there are a lot of people to thank and a lot of people to recognize for getting us to this point. And so I want to recognize Shondell Bernie Speaks, our MC for this morning, whom you've heard from. And I mentioned Ray and his leadership as part of the Providence Cultural Equity Initiative. I want to also recognize Brian Hendrickson from Roger Williams University, who's a partner on this project. And perhaps most importantly, and a spirit to all of this work, I want to recognize Cheryl Taylor. She's a Providence resident and a member of the community. And so much of this work has been driven by the community. In fact, perhaps the most radical idea that we have adopted throughout all of this is to center Black voices. Voices that have been excluded and marginalized for a very long time. What we've done is we've actually positioned them right in the center of these conversations so that the Black community can lead these conversations. It started over 2 years ago when we created the African American Advisory Group. And I'm pretty sure that Pastor Howard Jenkins was part of that first meeting. It was a meeting that brought together leaders in the Black community to help us discuss with the goal of overcoming the disproportionate impact that COVID was having in our neighborhoods. But soon we realized that it wasn't just a phenomenon that arose with COVID. Of course, there were longer, deeper structural issues that were causing that disproportionate impact. And so from the very beginning, we committed to going into and leaning into those conversations. So over the past 2 years, virtually every single week, I have met with a group of leaders, sometimes as many of over 100 people on the calls, to discuss these issues. And there are a number of ideas, there are a number of policies, there's a number of initiatives that have come from this work. And one of them was the launch of the Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparations process that brings us here today. So it's been said that there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. For our country and our community, examining the centuries of injustice committed against African heritage and indigenous people, and reconciling those truths is long overdue. 2 years ago, when our country and the world witnessed the horrific murder of George Floyd, there were a number of folks who, talked the talk about racial justice. Here in the city, we wanted to show our commitment to this work as well, but we also committed to doing the work. That's what led to the creation or the deeper investment in the African American Ambassador Group, and it's what led to this initiative here. We want to do it right. We want to elevate the voices of our Black, Indigenous, and communities of color. And we also want to do it deep. What we've learned is the wounds run deep, and so the solutions can't just be surface level. The solutions also have to run deep. And so we launched this process with a truth-telling report, working with researchers and led by Keith Stokes. And we produced a 200-page report outlining 400 years of history of treatment of BIPOC communities here in Providence and throughout the state. I want to re-emphasize the point that Keith just made. This isn't a report that simply highlighted wrongs that were committed 400 years ago, but rather it showed how each of these injustices over time built upon each other, and the injustices have been perpetrated on our community as recently as the past several years, just as much as we see in the distant past. And so after we launched that, we produced the report, we launched the reconciliation phase. We don't want that report to sit on a shelf. And more specifically, we want to bring the stories to life. There are actual people in our community and in our neighborhood that have been impacted about some of these racial injustices and structural racism over time. And we wanted to make their voices heard, their faces seen, and their stories told. And I'll defer to Ray and his team in just a second as they go into greater detail as to how exactly they did that and how exactly that work needs to continue. So this framework that they'll be speaking about was deeply community driven. Again, the Providence Cultural Equity Initiative, the Roger Williams University, the Providence Public Library participated, and many members of the AAAG Truth Telling and Reconciliation subgroup, all participating and bringing us to this point. The framework for reconciliation was piloted in the neighborhoods of Fox Point, Livet Hill, Upper South Providence, and West Elmwood. The same neighborhoods that Keith Stokes just talked about were the biggest targets of some of the most terrible racial injustices in our past. This framework also outlines a model and a proof of concept to continue this reconciliation work in perpetuity. Because reconciliation, as we've seen in other countries that have gone through this, is about bringing our community together. And the great irony here is that what we're telling the broader community is that you need not be afraid of the conversation around race. So often it's painted as an inherently divisive conversation, but it doesn't have to be that way. And we know because we've seen it in other countries. They've actually addressed them directly, and the communities have come together. We believe that is a model that has not only worked, but will work here in Providence. So last but not least, we wanted to make sure that we made the point that history is not just a thing of the past, but something that actively shapes the present. And there are real lives whose stories need to be told, need to be cataloged, and need to be included. So with all that, I'd like to pause, and I'd like to hand it over to our partners who are going to tell us about this important work around this framework of reconciliation that they've been working so hard in putting together, and I'm just so thankful to them for having brought us to this point. So I will step aside for a second, and we'll hear a great deal more about the reconciliation process.
Thank you so much for that, Mayor. We're going to bring to the podium Ray Two Hawks Watson, my apologies, from Providence Equity Initiative. Ray.
So first of all, I want to extend many thanks to the African American Ambassadors Group and Mayor Ellosa, just for the honor and the privilege of being involved in this second phase of this very important initiative. For those who have been following my own personal work, particularly here on the East Side, raising the voice of the community and shedding light on the experiences so that we can address a better future for us all has kind of been the backbone of most of the work that I've done. So when we got the opportunity in collaboration with Roger Williams University to move on this particular project, it was more than just a project for me. So when we engaged it, we had 4 particular overall goals that we really wanted to see realized in the work that we were doing. First, and this came from conversation with Mr. Stokes, just around the magnitude of the report and how something so substantial could be taken by the general public who, we in a society now where reading isn't necessarily the way that most people engage with things, more visual, more interactive. So the first thing we wanted to do, the first goal we had was to humanize the report. Because there's a lot of information in there's a lot of things that happen, but a lot of times we can get lost in the fact that those are actual people's lives that happened to, and in many parts, people who are still living in this city today. And that's why I'm so honored that Cheryl's here today to share a few words later, because Cheryl's father actually owned the business that was taken when University Heights was made. So we're living around people who experienced this, and for our goal as the coalition, we wanted to make sure that people understood that this happened to actual human beings that are in our community. So we decided first and foremost to create an online survey just to get feedback from the public on their thoughts about the truth-telling report, and then their thoughts around what steps should be taken to address the issues and the challenges that the Black community in Providence has faced. And then we also specifically identified individuals to serve as lead stakeholders. These were individuals that we were aware over the years had good reputations in their communities, were looked at in their communities as individuals to be voices for their communities and to listen to. And our real goal with them was not to hire them, to bring them on board to help us move the initiative forward, but to, first of all, say thank you for the work that they have been doing, and then to ask them respectfully if they would, in a sense, put their stamp of approval on this work that we were doing so that the community would buy into it. And we had 16 of those, 4 from the 4 different neighborhoods who did a great job of helping us to, when we articulated and reached out to community members, for the community to respond and say, yes, we'd like to be a part of that. We also did a number of engagement at a number of locations initially, whether it be local tribes based here in the Providence area, whether it be organizations, events that were going on. We were just out there letting people know that this initiative was taking place, and we wanted their feedback as members of the Providence community. So that was the first goal, to humanize it. Secondly, and I think that this is the most important element, we wanted to reframe the conversation around reparations. Usually when that conversation comes up, the first thing you'll hear from people who don't want anything to do with it is, well, this isn't the 1600s anymore. You weren't enslaved. I didn't own any slaves. No one alive today was impacted by that, so why do we even need to address it? To the mayor's point, immediately make it divisive. So we said, well, let's shift that conversation, and let's not jump back to the 1600s when Europeans were just arriving here in boats, but let's talk about the 50s and 60s, because Cheryl was still alive when she was impacted by that. My family was impacted by that. I'm sure there are people in this room right now whose families were impacted by that. And what does that do to the conversation around, well, no one was alive back then when that happened? What does that do to the conversation that, well, I didn't benefit from anything that happened? Or what does that do to the conversation of that's not impacting upon you? Reframing allowed us to do away with all of those conversations and continue to do away with them. I just shut down the conversation last night on social media. But that was our second goal, to really reframe the discussion around reparations to something that was tangible, to something that could be quantified, and to something that we could measure the harm and provide some actual remedy to it. Our third point was that we wanted to make the information more accessible and more easily to be engaged with. And I really have to take my hat off to the incomparable Mr. Donald King, son of Providence, who led the development of the creative team for the website and the web portal, which is fantastic because not only does it allow you to engage with the stories that have been collected, it has a function on it for others who are not able to participate thus far to include their narratives into it. So as the mayor spoke about, an ongoing opportunity for reconciliation, a strategy that Mr. King calls quilting. And we're excited to be implementing it here in Providence. And then the last element, and I'll close my mouth after this, we wanted to create tools that could equip the community to be able to move this work forward. Because we realized from the very beginning, this wasn't our project. We couldn't own this. This wasn't something that we could create in a manner that we would be able to control it moving forward. In fact, we thought that if we tried that, we'd be doing a disservice to the community. So what we did was we created tools. The web portal, the mini doc, which kind of shows and shows in that mini doc people who actually went through this and what they felt and what the impact was on them. To see their faces, the emotion, to hear it in their voice, it does something to people. And then once again, and Brian's going to talk about a little bit more about what our next steps are, really our goal was to provide tools for you all, the Rhode Island community and beyond, to take this work that we've done and do what you all need to do in the spaces where you're at. And the last thing I'll say is this. After all of this work, I think what's most exciting to me is the prospect that sometime next year, I might just happen to look on my social media screen and see some organization, some group I had no idea even existed perhaps, doing something around reconciliation and reparations for black folks in this city. To me, that's what's going to be the real sort of, okay, we did it. When people I don't know see the value in this work and are able to pick it up and continue the work in the same manner that I'm going to, Brian's going to, and all of our team members and the members of the new commission are going to as well. So with that being said, in our language, you say Katapatush, I want to also thank the pastor as well. I shared with them when I came in. I thought this was a very fitting space. My great-great-grandmother, Alice Michael Cross, full-blood Narragansett Indian, if I'm not mistaken, was one of the founders of this very church. and if not a founder, heavily involved with this church and the congregation here. So very honored for my own personal family heritage to be here sharing these words. Katapatush Wuchia Chusuta, thank you for listening, and I'll turn the floor back over to Shondell.
Thank you, Ray. And you can follow Ray. He is located on in the Mount Hope area of the East Side with the work that he does with the Providence Cultural Equity Initiative. We're going to ask that Cheryl Taylor come to the podium, and she's going to share some words. She is a Providence resident. Cheryl, welcome.
Thank you. Oh, excuse me. Thank you for having me. Oh, shoot. Kind of nervous, but I'm glad to be here. I'm from Pleasant Street. My family's from Pleasant Street. My father had a business on Lippert Street. They called it the lower end of Lippert Street. That was called Bugby Court. I don't know if you remember that and stuff. So I moved back. I moved back to Pleasant Street. And I'm thankful to be a part of the progress that Raymond is doing, and I'm very, very nervous, so please.
Doing great.
I apologize, I'm really nervous. This is not me. I'm a behind the scene person. This is not me, but thank you, I gotta go. I apologize.
It's okay. Some of us work best behind the scenes, and some of us, this is what we do. So we appreciate your behind the scenes work. We appreciate your portion in the video. It was very touching, and we're honored that you are a part of the project.
Thank you.
Next, I'm going to bring Brian Hendrickson, who is from Roger Williams University. He is the co-lead of the Reconciliation Project. Brian.
Thanks very much, Shondell, Mayor Ellosa, African American Ambassador Group, the hosts here. I'm just really grateful to have been a part of this project, and I'm looking forward to where things are going to go from here. So I want to speak just a little bit about that. And by way of maybe making an invitation to the broader community to be a part of what's going to come out of the work that we've done up to this point. So just a couple of things that I want to touch upon, because I think hearing from Ms. Cheryl now, if you want to hear more from her, one of the things that we want to do is, beyond the little mini doc trailer we've produced so far, is create a more developed documentary. We want to create, we have about 30 interviews right now with community members, so we want to develop those out so you can hear full interviews from everybody, have all of that accessible on the website, as a space where you can also send your own interviews in. What we're really talking about here is, facts are really important. It's important that the stories we tell are grounded in facts, and it's important that the stories we're telling now are grounded in the voices and its perspectives of the communities who've been most affected by the racial injustices that we're spotlighting. But I think that what we really need to be thinking about, I think it's appropriate that we're talking about this in the creative capital, that we need a compelling way to tell a story that brings the entire community together. So that's what we're looking at in terms of the website we're trying to develop, in terms of the way in which we're featuring interviews up against the factual historical basis that's provided by the truth-telling report. We're talking about hosting a broader set of community conversations, so it's an invitation for other organizations to join us in that work. And then we're thinking about how we can loop that back into a really creative presentation of all this, a multimedia presentation of all this, something that exists not just in digital space, but in physical spaces, as we're talking about art installations. We're talking about augmented reality components of this that can be accessible in physical space. So there's multiple ways of experiencing the truth. The important thing I think about reconciliation is that there's not some standard definition that we can all look to and be like, that's how you do it. We're doing this together right now as a community, and this is an invitation to organizations who want to support this work, who want to be involved in this work. Specifically, I think organizations that maybe represent some of the injustices that have been done to the community. This is your opportunity to lend your voice and be part of this process. So I'm just really excited about what's going to come out of this. I'm really thankful that we're able to link this up with a meaningful reparations process. But again, the work of reconciliation is ongoing. And so what I really hope is that this is just the beginning, and that there's a lot more news to come about what reconciliation looks like in Providence and the story we're going to be telling about that together. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Like Brian said, there are so many ways to become involved. And we know that this work is very interesting, and we know that we are going to have a lot of spectators who are going to be looking at Providence with a fine-tooth comb and judging the work that we're doing. But instead of judging, please connect with us and learn how to be a support, learn how to get involved, learn how to become more educated with the work that's being done, because it's very, very impactful. And I just want to also acknowledge there are members from the African American Ambassadors Group here, and there are members throughout this whole church who have just been deeply involved in this work. And we thank you all. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Ray. And I'm going to hand it back over to Mayor Ellosa.
All right. So with the research that was put together in a Matter of Truth report and the reconciliation framework in place, our community can begin a focused, evidence-based approach to reparations. That's why today I am proud to sign an executive order establishing the Providence Municipal Reparations Commission. This commission is going to consist of 13 community leaders, 7 of them appointed from my office, 6 appointed from the Providence City Council. We have most of the members that I'm appointing to this commission here today. So I want to recognize, and save you for last, my friend. First, PCEI, Providence Cultural Equity Initiative CEO, Raymond Two Hawks Watson. We have Miss Wanda Brown, who's part of the faculty at College Unbound. We have the president of Rhode Island Pride, Rodney Davis. We have the CEO of 25 Bow Street, Lanre Ajakaye. We also have RISD Assistant Professor, Jess Brown, who couldn't be with us today, but we're glad to have her help. We have the CEO of Career Debt's Computer Science Institute, Arnell Millhouse. I appreciate your participation. And I wanted to say Jim Vincent for last. And Jim Vincent has been a voice on racial justice, or a leading voice on racial justice in our city and our state for a very, very, very long time. And I hope that the work that we continue doing through this process is also a continuation of the work that you've been doing, perhaps longer than anyone in this room. So I appreciate it. And the NAACP President Jim Vincent will also be part of this commission. I want to just take a quick moment and recognize and thank you all for stepping up. You all are extremely busy. You have so many things, both professional and personal, pulling you in different directions. And the fact that you're taking time out of your busy schedules to do this work means a lot to us. You are truly, truly setting an example and laying down a path that's going to be a model, not just for our state, but for the entire country. I also want to take a second to thank Council President Igliozzi, who, although he can't be here today, is working to submit names from the council to appoint their members to this commission. Together, this 13-member commission will report back to the city within 90 days with clear recommendations on community engagement strategies throughout the process of reparation, and reparations work being done in other cities, and to make recommendations for the appropriate policies, programs, projects to begin repairing harm. And their work is going to culminate with a report of recommendations that they'll be making to the officials in the city of Providence for us to put into effect. Now, I want to be absolutely clear on a couple of things. The first is the charge of the commission. The charge of the commission is open-ended. There are no limits, there are no bounds to what those recommendations should be. Second thing that I want to make abundantly clear as well is that while my administration, and I'm sure the City Council, we are fully committed to doing what we can, there is no way that we here right now can make right all the wrongs of the past. However, what we can do is encourage and inspire other institutions and other levels of government to join in this effort as well. As Ray mentioned just earlier, the fruits of this effort will be, yes, the actual work that comes out of this, but when we see these conversations and this work sprouting in different places that we did not directly engage, that's when we know we have been even more successful. So I'm confident that this commission of community leaders and the advocates involved will provide invaluable insights into creating a path forward that's right for our community. So thank you to our African American Ambassador Group, the Providence Cultural Equity Initiative, Roger Williams University, Providence Public Libraries, and everyone involved for bringing us to this point. The forthcoming work of Providence Reparations Commission, and last, I want to thank Pastor Jenkins once again for hosting us here as we close out Black History Month. But we know that while we celebrate it in this special month, this work continues throughout the year. And so it's the last day of the month, but the work continues on as strongly as ever. Thank you everyone for bringing us to this point, and I look forward to signing this executive order.
So we're gonna move the podium slightly, so folks wanna grab their microphones or if you can move forward. We're gonna put the table right here. Where did the podium? Oh,
it really is a special moment to sign this thing. And I just want to say that doing it surrounded by leaders in the community who've been moving this work forward is a great honor for me. I look forward to continuing this work going forward. So with that, congratulations. Now we got work to do. This is good stuff. Thank you, Barb.
Will there be any questions from the media?
yeah, we're gonna do questions.
Thank you.
1 second. Sorry.
Now we're going to do the bring it back.
Sorry. We're gonna bring the podium back. No, Alright, we're good. Hold on, wait, let, maybe. Thank you so much. Yeah, the legs all come out. There we go. Yeah, it'll work.
Mayor, what kind of urgency do you feel?
Okay, give me just a second.
Sure.
We good?
Good?
What kind of urgency do you feel to get this done or get this rolling? And, you know, during your term in office, and you talked about this going on in perpetuity. Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the important thing is getting the ball rolling, and to get it rolling in a sustainable way so that, you know, it continues on long into the future. You know, me and my team, we're only going to be in office for another, I think, 10 months. But I think we're establishing a really good foundation that this is going to continue on regardless. I think the most important part of this is that it's all community-driven and community-led. So administrations will come and go, elected officials will come and go, but that voice of the community, that's like the bedrock, that's the foundation of this process. And so as long as that remains strong, this work will continue going on strong as well.
Ray talked about people coming on board that he doesn't even know. What is that going to mean to you? You see people getting involved down the line.
Yeah, I think in the same way, you know, we know that, you know, you got to plant the seed, and that's what we've been doing. We're starting to see fruits of that labor, but we hope it'll continue to spread on its own. And you know, I think I speak for Ray and his team, as I speak for everyone here. You know, we're not thinking small. We want this to continue here in Providence. But when you look at the construction of, you know, Highway 95, it wasn't just Providence that was affected by this. You know, other cities in Rhode Island, it was the same thing. When you look at the neighborhoods that were torn down, the neighborhoods that were separated, you know, it wasn't the fancy, wealthy neighborhoods. It was, you know, the most vulnerable. It was people of color. It was African American community. And so, you know, it's not just Providence. We're also not limiting this to Rhode Island. We have several cities that have reached out to us. They're interested in starting, you know, their own reconciliation and reparations process, and they're reaching out to us to do it. And you know, I can tell you that knowing the cities that have gone down this path, no city has done it in as comprehensive, community-driven way as the way that we have. So we hope that, you know, our work is going to be a model for other cities throughout the country. And I'll stress this point every single time. You know, I don't want to raise expectations to the point where people feel that we as a city can right all the wrongs. That is impossible. We just don't have the capacity to do that. But if we can get the ball rolling and get other institutions, you know, big institutions here in this neighborhood, throughout the city, other levels of government, state government, even national government, then we can begin to truly put a dent on the challenges that we face. But this is just a seed that we, you know, hope will continue to grow and spread.
Mayor Ellosa, you talked about,
So we'll go with
Amy and then Pat.
You mentioned that the committee doesn't really have any limitations on the recommendations that can develop, but is there some sort of concept of what's feasible, what the outcome could be? Would these be monetary payments? I know we've asked this question before, but just some specifics.
Yes. So you know, we've allocated some dollars in our ARPA budget that we have submitted to the city council. So there's $15 million that we've allocated, and about 4.5 million of that is allocated towards infrastructure projects, specifically for BIPOC community. And then we have $10 million that hasn't been designated with specific uses. Now that is for the commission to make recommendations to us. Now, I also want to be clear on this, we're not limiting it to just that $14.5 million. Now, this is ongoing work that we want to invest in. And so I would imagine that the committee has other recommendations, and I look forward to seeing what those recommendations entail. You also mentioned, Amy, these payments. So reparations, according to the committee, may take the form of direct payments, but they may not. I know there's been a lot of talk and a lot of emphasis on the impact of discriminatory housing policies. As Keith mentioned early on, in the 1950s and the 60s, in the era of urban renewal, if you were applying for a loan and you wanted to either purchase a home in the central city, or if you wanted to purchase a home and you were black, good luck. You weren't going to get a federally insured mortgage. And so we know that these programs are both anti-urban and anti-black. So you have great wealth being built. In fact, the day after the Great Recession of 2008, the day after, most Americans still held the majority of their wealth and equity in their homes. Now that's how big of a wealth building scheme home buying has been. But folks in the city and black folks were systematically left out of that. You have this searing image. Now there's also a map that we have from before 1962. And this is a full neighborhood. Every single one of this densely packed neighborhood, all filled with homes. And those folks, those African Americans that lived in that neighborhood, they weren't able to qualify for mortgages to buy somewhere else. They were left out of this incredible wealth building scheme, which is home ownership. And so anyways, there's been a great deal of focus on home ownership. And so I'm really interested in what kind of ideas and recommendations the committee makes around how we can encourage, incentivize, and support more home ownership in these particular neighborhoods and by the communities that were displaced and impacted by them. So I'm open-minded as to what shape those reparations recommendations will take, and I trust that the committee will take a very, very creative, comprehensive look to the right approaches.
Mayor?
Anybody want to add anything to that? Okay.
Mayor?
Yeah.
You alluded quite gracefully to, all my words, the sins of the past, but also looking forward to the future in terms of these same issues occurring as we speak. And I just want to go down a couple really quickly. The state of Rhode Island and Commerce Corporation, their mission almost appears to be in lockstep with the same type of devaluation of minority BIPOC-owned communities. And I'll be specific. For example, a multi-million-dollar rail station being built in Pawtucket, which is going to ultimately gentrify significant parts of Pawtucket and help, affect the Cape Verdean community. You've got the Beatrice Hotel, a $4.5 million grant to subsidize a luxury hotel. That's just among a number of it. You talked about highways. We just missed an historic opportunity to reconnect communities through a new vision for the 610 connector. So, as the saying goes, I have seen the enemy, and quite frankly, it is us. So what can be done to impact government policies which are weaponizing government funding, ultimately to the detriment of the BIPOC community?
Yeah, that's a deep question. So I'll share with you my perspective. I'll invite anyone else who wants to add to this. As we've been engaged in this conversation over the past couple of years, I think that what I have, sort of the light that went off in my mind more than anything else, was that conversations about race need not be divisive. But they've been so divisive for so long that we think that they're inherently that way, and there's just no way but that. But it doesn't have to be that way. I truly believe that the injustices are clear. I mean, we have the report, but our own lived experiences shows that. So anyone who's looking at this with honest eyes sees that there's injustices. I also believe that most of us, in fact almost all of us, we want to be part of the solution. I mean, there's something inside of us, just as human beings, that, you know, makes us feel indignant about people being treated so wrongly. If I could digress for just a second, we see what's happening in Ukraine right now. Most of us have no connection to that community. You know, most of us have never been there. But like, we feel it when we see the images. It's just wrong what's happening. And I think that applies here as well. When there's an injustice in our community, it impacts all of us, and we want to do something about it. So what I think has to happen more than anything else is, you know, we can't be afraid to raise, you know, race conversations. You know, we, just a couple of years ago, reparations was a whole third rail, never to be discussed in polite company. You know, at least, you know, not if you wanted a future in professional society. But I hope that we're breaking down some of those barriers every day with the work that we're doing, so that we see that, you know, Providence went down the road of reparations and the sky didn't fall. And not only did the sky not fall, but, you know, perhaps we're making progress and bringing people together. Because look at the way that we've addressed race up until this point. We've avoided the conversation, we've swept it under the rug. And can any one of us really say that we're heading in the right direction right now? So we got to change course. We have to address it differently. And I hope more than anything else, that's what us going through this entire process entails. And then we'll see, hopefully, public opinion, political will, and community division really changing course and supporting these kinds of efforts.
When you started going down
Hold on
this
a
road,
second.
Mayor, you spoke roughly about $15 million invested in this project from ARPA money.
That's right.
That's one-time ARPA money. Where's the money coming next time?
So, again, there's these chunk of dollars that have already been sort of set aside, and they're part of the budget that I submitted to the city council. But I would imagine that the recommendations that come from the committee are going to be much broader than just $15 million. And so, it'll be incumbent upon us, the future leaders here in the city and the future members of the community, to make that, to put that into effect. So there are a lot of ways where it could happen. It can come from direct city investments. It can come from institutional partners that are also part of this work. It could come from different emphasis in the programs that we already have. We can't let the challenges and the hurdles be the reason why we don't start down this path. We use the expression of it's a marathon, it's a sprint, it's a relay. Yeah, it's every one of those things, but it's one where there are hurdles all along the way. And yes, we got to figure out how we're going to scale and overcome some of these hurdles, but that's not a reason to not start the process. And we have full confidence that not only will we overcome those hurdles at every point that we confront them, but if and when this is done right, we're going to find that we're going to be in strong position to pass the baton to the next city, the next institution, the next leaders in the community to take it even further than we could have imagined. So we're starting the process that hopefully will go on long after we're gone.
All right, last one was Stephen, then we
just
gotta wrap
to be
on this.
clear, Mayor, you talked about unallocated ARPA funds. How much is that? How much do you want to earmark for this out of that?
Right. So we've allocated $14.5 million, and in that $14.5 million, we did not specify exactly what they would go for. We're waiting for recommendations from the committee to let us know.
Do you feel that's a figure, 14.5 million, that could go toward?
Yeah, but again, we're not limiting it to just 14.5 million. We're also very interested in seeing what the recommendations are and seeing how we can make really meaningful, creative investments in this space. And look, we're also open to partnerships. And so, let's say, for example, if the committee says the city should invest deeply in increasing homeownership among the Bipod community, and that's part of our reparations strategy. If another organization, say Rhode Island Housing, If they have a goal of also increasing homeownership among this community, but they don't want to call it reparations, that's perfectly fine. They're partners and they can be allies in this work, regardless of how they choose to frame it. But the committee will certainly set down a marker and set priorities for what we want to see through this work.
Thank you, guys.